and talking about technology and the wildfire crisis as we're starting to describe it. That's not a new thing to us. But talking about how technology can be part of the solution, but also talk about some of the challenges to doing that with some of the panel members. I'm excited to be here, so I will do my best to not spend too much time talking, because I just had the privilege of sitting down for an hour with our 4 panelists, and that should have been our presentation, because we sat and chatted for an hour and exchanged ideas and things that we were thinking about, and it was I hope we can capture that with you today when we're talking. My background, I am the executive director for a nonprofit called the Earthfire Alliance. My path to this position started in space. So I'm a mechanical engineer, came out of Rice University, but then I went into the Marine Corps, and through the course being in the Marine Corps, I ended up at U.S. Space Command and ended up supporting a fire in Colorado called the Hayman Fire in 2002, which was one of the first big megafires for Colorado that really had a long-term impact on the state, and so many things were brought to it from a technology perspective that we just started learning the complexities. Fast forward through years of working in the space industry and even in the fire technology industry, I get to sit up here with our panel. I wanted to let you know who we have up here. So we have Ian McCubbin. Ian McCubbin is a system engineer. He's from JPL, but he has a really interesting perspective in that his job is to coordinate the Space Accelerator and industry engagement at JPL initiatives. So despite his huge background in science and technology, atmospheric science and hyperspectral, what he's bringing to the table is not just that, he's actually bringing the coordination across industry into JPL initiatives. So thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Brian.
Felix Seidel is with us, also from JPL. He manages earth science research at JPL, has a tremendous background in lots of different projects, and what I thought was the most interesting is he is really deep in trying to get collaborative communities together in today's structure. So traditionally, space was very much government-centric, academic-centric, and now Felix is working with organizations like the World Economic Forum in order to bring philanthropies, nonprofit organizations, global organizations together to apply technology to wildland fire. So it's really the applied science of wildland fire. So thank you for being here.
Thanks, Brian.
And Beth Rieken. So Beth is here. She is from Muon Space. So she has a long career in NASA in lots of different areas, from hypersonics into space programs. And she has recently joined Muon Space as the mission manager for the FireSat constellation, which is a constellation of satellites purpose-built for wildland fire. The journey for that is a very interesting one. She'll talk about the journey for that program and where it came from and its background. So thank you for being here. And finally, we have Cathy Olkin, who is the Vice President for Infrared Missions at Muon Space, another part of the Muon Space group, also has a long history with NASA in space programs, both terrestrial remote sensing and also remote sensing outside of the Earth remote sensing. In fact, we were having a discussion of where are Cathy's satellites today, and they're leaving the solar system and their missions are continuing, which bodes well for FireSat. Like, hopefully they don't leave our solar system, but the ability for them to persist over time is amazing. So thank you for joining.
Thanks, Brian.
I'd like to talk a little and set the stage before we jump in. This is our panel group, and talk a little bit about wildland fire from my perspective and the changes that the community is looking at in wildland fire. The first thing I'll bring up is that not all fire is bad. In fact, even the term bad fire and good fire, we're trying to drift away from that and talk about the natural role of fire on the landscape. And wildland fires can have a negative impact on us, and they can have a negative impact on the ecology of our planet, but they're not good and bad in their own right. It is the types of fires that occur and how they impact our landscape, and whether they're natural or not in our landscape, or if they intersect where we as humans have built up and have our values that may be at risk with those wildfires. This is a summary of some of the challenges we're seeing. Obviously, with the impacts of wildfire on our planet, the frequency and magnitude of intense wildfires is what is changing. It is not the numbers of fires that we have. It's not even the amount of burned acres that we have. It's the type of burned acres and the types of communities that are burning or ecologies that are burning that are starting to have a dramatic change in what we're seeing in the planet and our ecology. At the exact same time, our governments and our local communities are spending a record amount of money in order to respond to those wildfires. So we have this intersection of these wildfires are very extreme, and at the same time, the efforts we have done traditionally up to this point has been to do a response to that, which is fire departments, it is aviation. The amount of money we're spending on those is increasing disproportionate to what we can support over the long term. Certainly we have the impacts of what it costs us, but most important, we are starting to impact more and more of the world's population through health effects from wildfires and also negative effects. We always like to talk about statistics. The only reason I bring this slide up is the 1 in 6 Americans live in communities that are at risk of wildland fire. For those of us who live, we often think that's West Coast. For those who are from the East Coast, where you had a lot of smoke coming in from the Canadian wildfires last year, I think you would say 1 in 6 is a conservative number of people who are now at risk due to health effects of wildfire. We have wildfires now and communities in Texas, in Oklahoma, certainly on the East Coast now, that are affected by the same type of conditions we see on the West Coast. I won't target too much on the cost of wildfires, except for the staggering amount that wildfires cost us. The big number, of course, if you really want to look at, is how much suppression costs us today. So this is in the space world, it's like trying to change the trajectory of a satellite way outside of the orbit you're going to. Small changes early in an orbit are less expensive in delta V. If you wait till the end, you're going to spend a lot of money and you may not be effective. And that's a great analogy for wildland fire suppression. One of the things I'd like to point out as we talk about that exact concept is catching fires when they're small and increasing the decision options of our communities, which is, it's a small fire, do we suppress it, do we not? Can we do mitigation beforehand? Can we change our tactics? Can we decide which fires are high and low priority? Those decisions, if done early, cost us less and actually preserve our communities more. One of the studies recently done by the Gordon and Betty Moore says that if we can reduce our response time to 15 minutes in California alone, by 15 minutes, that would save the state of California $8 billion combined. That's a combined number, about $1 billion just in the response costs, but also the damage and loss costs. So the more you can push it upstream, the more we can do. At the same time, the way we fight fires is changing, but we're using the same tools. And that's why we're here today, is to talk about how do we change the tools we use to support our firefighters as they show up on a scene today. These are some statistics and some comments coming from Western fire chiefs about what it takes to be a firefighter on the fire line and what the impacts are today. You can see the same thread about if you interact in the first minutes of initial attack, you can actually do something about the fire. A fire analogy, one of the comments is, you never get your initial attack back. You have to make the right decisions very quickly in initial attack, and if you're not armed with information, you're already behind the power curve. For our panel, we picked a couple of challenging topics for them to talk about. So this is what we presented each other, and when we go into our individual briefs, you'll hear this. But we had 3 challenges. One is the capabilities of the tools that firefighters and our community has, not just firefighters, but our fire planners, our risk mitigation folks, is what we use today is often not optimized for the wildfire regime. Certainly not optimized for the conditions we see today with fast-moving, intense wildfires, but we're often using systems that were built for some other purpose and we're repurposing for fire. At the same time, the technology base from remote sensing to new space is moving so fast that firefighters often turn and look and say, why is that not being applied to my problem? And so that's one of the challenges we have, is how do we get away from repurposing old technology and taking advantage of maturing technology? And you'll hear us a lot talk about how we focus the needs in these capabilities on firefighters. So these are some of the challenges for the capabilities we currently have. We're not a policy group, but it affects technology. Is the fire community today has a roles and responsibility challenge firefighters and firefighting both in the United States and even worldwide is not centralized. Fires are often considered a local issue, which it is. If you have a fire in your community, it all starts local. But as they move fast, they start involving multiple fire districts, and a decentralized fire community means it's even hard to deploy technology for that community. At the same time, we for a very short period of time said, we're going to shift it all from federal, we're going to go to commercial, private industry is going to do this, and we've now realized that business model is hard to close for emergency management, so how do we bridge that gap to make it an incentive for private industry to be here? And finally, comprehensive data is the most important piece. When we look at the challenges facing us. The majority of data that we have to understand wildland fires is collected during big, huge fires. We actually miss and don't understand how many small fires occur on this planet, and from research we know which ones and what causes them to get big, but statistically we don't have that data, because we often only collect fires when we have a lot of data when we have a lot of firefighters actually at a fire. That means we don't have a comprehensive view of fire impacts on the planet, and we don't have a lot of visibility into the other things that affect a wildland fire. So those three challenges are what as a group, we sat down and said, let's talk about those within our respective areas. In order for brief, I will move through this slide, and you will have this slide. This is the U.S. Forest Service view of technology and the role of technology in the wildland fire system. This is an excellent view. We will talk a little bit about the challenges of taking a view like this, which is everything from data processing to integrated data services to data standards. All of these are things that other communities have done very well, that our fire community wants to do extremely well, but the challenges I just stated hold us back from achieving this. So I like to keep this slide with me as we look at challenges. This is what the fire community has asked for as the role of technology in fire. How do we get there? And with that, I'll leave this final slide as we move over and start talking, and Ian's going to talk to us a little bit. And as we think about wildland fire and technology if we give firefighters the right data, then we will be able to change and they will be able to change the decisions they make in response to that data. If it's timely detection, it will allow us to deploy resources better. If the data is accessible on a global basis, we can move away from having essentially haves and have-nots, and also we can inform other communities to have agency in their own right. Can the public be part of the awareness that we have because they have rapid access to accurate data? We also have to understand what causes megafires and how do they move across the landscape and how do they affect us. Most important, how do they affect us across? So with that, what I like to do is turn it over to Ian, and Ian's going to talk a little bit from his perspective at JPL.
Great. Thanks, Brian. Yeah, so I've been doing both remote sensing, airborne for a long time, and a lot of wildfire mapping, and then also recently been working on startup engagement and how do we work with the new space technology sector. And so that's been an interesting merging, because what we're seeing is kind of the first go-to-market strategy around commercial remote sensing actually is the wildfire problem. And we'll talk a lot about that on the panel. With JPL, this is 2009. This is a picture of the lab. For anybody that's been there, this is looking effectively west, and this is the station fire, which was burned effectively for a month and a half in Southern California in 2009. 250 square miles of the San Gabriel forests were burned. Unfortunately, 2 firefighters lost their lives, and it impacted the JPL community. Fast forward to January here. I mean, Felix was evacuated for about a month, I think, or several weeks at least. Charles hit on this earlier. 200 of our employees lost their homes, impacted former director, the current director, and then the deputy director. It's just a lot of people, and the impact of the JPL community was massive. This is looking due east, so this is the other direction that burned, and this was the Eaton Canyon fire, and that was just devastating to the Los Angeles community, and especially to JPL and Caltech, and still lasting impacts, and Charles hit on that earlier. So JPL is not only understanding the technology side of wildfires, but the local impact to our community. And so we're very vested right now, and we have been for decades, in understanding the tools of technology, remote sensing, how those can be applied. This is let me see if I can do this. This is an image of 1 year from 2020 during COVID, right, when the world shut down, but fires didn't shut down. So this is from the MODIS, the MODIS satellite, which has been on orbit for 20 years, and this is showing 1 full year of wildfire data from the MODIS instruments. There's 2 on orbit, and so this is 1 kilometer resolution, effectively daily global perspective of how fires burn. Here we are in August. Now, oh, there you go. You can see the West Coast starting to light up in the late summertime, early fall, but you see how fire is part of, we call it a blue planet. Some people call it a red planet. Red planet's Mars. We understand that pretty well at JPL too, but we are a planet of fire. And it just shows you how much of this is a global perspective. What's interesting about what's going on in the commercial sector right now is we're now having the ability to zoom in on the Earth. So this was data collected with one of JPL's airborne instruments. This is 4-meter data, repeat flight plans with an airborne instrument over a test case and fire sense program down in the southeast of the US this spring. This is thanks to Phil Dennison at the University of Utah put this data together, working with the AVRIS team. AVRIS is the benchmark hyperspectral system developed at JPL. And so what they did is they flew the airplane over, it was a King Air, and they did repeat passes so they could really understand what is the process that's going on in fires. So now this would be caught in 1 MODIS pixel, right? This is kind of the scale we're dealing with. And now we're starting to look at how is the fire evolving? How is it moving through the ecosystem? And these are questions that as we get to high temporal and high spatial resolution from small satellite constellations, we can really move the needle forward in understanding the fire process, living with fire, which Brian was talking about. Fire is part of the natural ecosystem. We have had more than 50 years of fire suppression in this country, and our forests aren't so healthy right now, and so we're seeing these big mega fires coming in. If we can use technology to manage fires, to understand the fire process, we can go in and do effective controlled burns, which will then reduce the risk. It'll buy down our risk around wildfires. And then here's this one. This one's pretty neat because it's right along the roads. It's showing these roads catching on fire. And again, this is revolutionary. When I saw this a couple months ago, I had never seen anything at this spatial and temporal scale. And this is exactly what's going on in the small satellite community right now in the commercial sector, and we're going to talk more about that. But I just wanted to kind of highlight these, I think, amazing high resolution, high spatial, high temporal resolution images that we're able to see, and we will be seeing from FireSat constellation, Aurora Tech constellation, and merging this data together. Great, that was it, yep. Oh, one more thing, sorry. With my startup engagement, I'm also working with a company out of Denver called Urban Sky. And what we're doing is we're using micro high altitude balloons, stratospheric balloons, that are low cost, steerable, controllable. And we actually, over the LA fire, flew these, one of the balloons. We're able to get above the controlled airspace. People talk about drones and how drones can revolutionize looking at fires. A lot of the fire agencies don't love having drones flying over active fire control. And so what this does is it goes up to 65,000 feet. It's a collectible, controllable. It had a lot of investment from the Air Force, the Space Force, the Army. So there's been a DOD. It's a dual use technology. They have this a balloon that goes up and it has a gondola system or a bus on it, and it has a Starlink capability. And so what we were funded by the NASA Earth Science Technology Office to do is to launch this and then also use it as a last mile connection, one of the technologies that Brian was talking about, which allows a relay system for firefighters. So a lot of these fires are in remote, hostile, complex terrain where you don't have line of sight communication. So all of a sudden we can serve the balloon as a satellite relay or phone relay system, two-way radio relay system, and then we can also beam down imagery from the high-resolution imagery from the long-wave camera, so the infrared, which is shown here in the lower right quadrant, which shows you the burn area. And if you look to the left, you can actually see where the fire retardant was sprayed with the red line. And that actually is where the fire stopped. And this is right above the Getty Museum in Southern California. So this is technology that NASA's interested in, JPL's interested, but it's also showing our partnership with the new space economy or the startup ecosystem. So thank you.
All right, thanks, Ian. Yeah, I think everybody can tell that wildfires is really something close to our heart at JPL, physically, but also emotionally, and a lot of what we do. And I think here on the panel we're going to focus mostly on active fires as they burn. We want to detect them and track them. But there's more to that. There's more layers that are really important to understand the global challenge, or wildland fire crisis, as we call it as well. And that element is that if we want to look at it holistically, we need to be able to understand the environment in which this fire burns. We want to be able to predict when this fire happen, or when there's the largest likelihood for them to happen, and what happens if they burn. For that, we need to have, and we've talked about this, new technologies really, because it's not good enough anymore to walk through the forest and have your local understanding. If we want to do this globally for all the communities, we need to use remote sensing, Earth observation data to understand the environment, the fuels, the winds, where people live, where there's ignitions, and the weather as well, which, as we've seen a lot in these LA fires, can drive significant outcomes. And so it's an all-hands-on-deck approach, I think, that's needed. So we're going to talk about observation, technology, but there's a really important piece is the end users, the stakeholders, and obviously the general public being affected by the fires on a, unfortunately, almost daily basis now. So we're going to touch on that throughout the panel a little bit. I don't want to spend too much time on that, but so at JPL, together with Caltech, funded by Google.org, we're working on a project with goes after a vision that we'll probably talk a little bit more later, which really goes towards that we globally can understand wildfire risk much better. So we want to grab the informations that are already available or will become available. One thing I can mention that the new really outstanding, groundbreaking radar satellite will be launched at the end of this month. It's called NISAR, and that will provide us with key information on fuels around the globe, unprecedented information that we did not have in the past. We need to bring them on a focal point together and work on those data, extract the information that's required and needed for the general public. Last thing I want to mention, NASA is also working with the communities, with JPL and centers, and also stakeholders, decision makers, since about 2 years on a 5-year project called Fire Sense. And that one is really geared towards demonstrating and developing these new technologies in a way that they can be operationalized. They can be brought to the users, brought to the people who need it in the field. Bringing together airborne data, as we've seen it before, absolutely unique, first time ever, spaceborne, bringing the modeling communities in there, science as well as then the applications. Thanks.
Hi everyone, I'm Beth, and I am here to talk about the FireSat program. I'm really honored to be representing the program. It's an amazing team of people. And there are 3 things that I'm really excited about this program, especially for this panel. One is the pace at which we're accomplishing this work. So really from the idea to launching and operating these satellites in space, we're looking at 18 months. And so that's just an incredible speed to be able to impact these firefighters on Earth. The second one is that these are purpose-built systems. So we are designing this technology with and for a specific end user in mind for these frontline firefighters, for the fire scientists. So we're not just trying to repurpose something to help this community. We're really including them in this journey and making something that's really impactful. And then the third thing is how this mission is funded, which is philanthropically in partnership with the Earth Fire Alliance. So this is a new way to try and partner together and do these public good missions. So I'll share a little bit about the program. The Earth Fire Alliance, as Brian mentioned, is a global community-led nonprofit that is delivering fire data globally. FireSat is a first of its kind satellite constellation that's focused specifically on fire conditions, and fire's ecological effects, so that more holistic view, a global approach. And eventually that constellation will be 50+ satellites in LEO, each with a wildfire first multispectral imager. So a little bit further details about FireSat. It will be global coverage. It's a multi-satellite constellation, again, 50+ satellites. We are doing this in phases. So FireSat 0 is our prototype, protoflight satellite. It is actually up on orbit now, and this was something that is owned by Muon Space, and we're using to de-risk the rest of this operation. So we have it up there, we are commissioning it, we're learning lots of things that will help inform our initial operations. Next year, we will be launching 3 more spacecraft. That will be the initial operating capability for FireSat constellation. And then following that, we'll start launching more satellites, and we are aiming for that 20-minute revisit rate globally for monitoring fire. So very exciting. The multispectral instrument on the satellite has 6 channels, Viz through LWIR. We do have 2 MWIR channels that delineate fire intensity, because again, we were focusing on fire for this instrument. We do have high spatial resolution, rapid cadence of observation, and in key geographies, we're really looking for full bandwidth, low latency downlink with near real-time data being delivered to our end users. A little bit about the timeline. So again, that rapid pace of Earth-Fire Alliance was established in 2024. Muon is the technology partner with the Earth-Fire Alliance, so we're building and operating the satellites. We have a satellite that launched in March up in orbit, and we are building 3 more right now that will launch next year, and then we're looking at 2029, 2030 for that full operational capability. So we are moving fast. This is something that we're very proud of and will be impactful. This is an image of our FireSat 0 protoflight on the SpaceX rocket. It was launched in March, and it's up on orbit. For our initial operating capability, we will have 3 satellites in a orbit around Earth, so it'll be about a 12-hour revisit rate. It's really a demonstration of our key enabling technology, so from the spacecraft to the instrument to the data processing, and really ultimately what this is for is getting the data to the first responders with a very low latency as quick as we can. And we will, Cathy's going to talk a little bit more about what is being delivered to our end users, but we are producing data-derived products that are specific to fire, looking at fire detection, perimeters, fire progression, and radiative power. And we'll also be delivering the L1 and process data. And eventually moving up to that full operating capability, 20-minute revisit rate for our mid-latitude geographies. And we are really thinking about this in partnership, again, with the end users in 4 different categories, and Cathy will touch more on those. So, thank you.
Thanks, Beth. Yeah, I'm really going to focus on that stakeholder engagement piece. It's critical to FireSat across the whole lifetime of the program. So during formulation, we focused very heavily on talking to first responders, fire scientists, land managers across many different agencies to really understand what their needs were. This was critical to be able to identify what we needed to build, what was going to solve their problems. And so we had hundreds of conversations. We went to conferences for wildland fire. We went to conferences for fire scientists. We visited people at their workplace, whether it was a local county fire station or the Geographic Area Coordination Center. There's only a handful of those across the country, and visited them to understand their workflow and their problems. Not only that, we reached out internationally. We worked with people in Australia to understand their needs, in Europe, and in Brazil and other countries, because this is a global system. So stakeholder engagement really anchored the beginning of this program. And it drove the requirements for what we needed to build. We heard the need for early detection. We heard the need for detection throughout the full life cycle of a fire. So even when you've got very large developed fires, we heard the need for a low false positive rate. So we designed a system that could provide those services to the fire community. One thing we did was we have a relatively large or relatively small GSD in the midwave, 50 meters at nadir. And so this allows us to pick up fires that are just 1% of the pixel area. So we are sensitive to fires that are 5 meters by 5 meters on a side. So you can fit many fires that size in this room. It's typically the size of a classroom. Also, we heard the need for that improved temporal cadence, like Ian was talking about with the amazing AVRIS data from the FireSense campaign, that combination of spatial resolution and temporal cadence. This would be, of course, from a satellite system, but having a wide collection area helps you get to that fast revisit rate, the combination of the number of satellites and a wide swath. But the stakeholder engagement doesn't end at the beginning. It has to continue throughout the whole life cycle of the program. And in particular, when thinking about what data products to serve to these communities and work with them to make sure that these are the right products and they can be folded into their workflow easily. So we have currently planned 4 fire data products. These are hotspots. In conversations with the first responder community, it was important that they had confidence levels associated with them. So good geolocation and confidence levels. Fire radiative power, to be able to understand the intensity of the fire along the fire front. Fire perimeters are, of course, a key attribute of a fire that these communities need, so they know where to place first responders, where to have fire breaks, what actions they need to take. And then our fire progression data product is really a history of those fire perimeters, rather than a forward-looking fire propagation model, but having that history helps understand how those fires developed. And here you see an image in the midwave and long-wave infrared over Kilauea, showing a volcanic eruption that was, this image was captured in June of this year from our protoflight satellite, which is on orbit. And this image here shows data collected over Sydney, where you can see on the left, the long-wave infrared. The next band over is a false color, shortwave, near IR, and red image. Then there's the midwave infrared, and finally the long-wave infrared again on the right. And what I really like about this composite image is it kind of shows you the power across all of these different bands to look at different features on the landscape. And of particular interest to me is just looking at that thermal signature. And it's really interesting to look in Sydney Harbor on the right part of this image to look at the water mixing between the ocean and the harbor. And this image was also taken in June. And with that, I think we'll head into some questions.
Excellent. And we can leave up cool thermal images, so we can go back and forth between the volcano and this over time. Yeah. And we're gathering some questions, and we'll mix questions with sort of some of the topics you brought up as we go through. And one of the things that I think was interesting that it came up to me as we talked about the speed with which you're on orbit, and this is true not just with space systems. Other technology coming into fire and emergency management is happening at the pace of IT, of the new technological revolution in information processing and technology. So there's an adoption curve, but at the same time, there's a complementary mission for climate science, fire science, and understanding that. And how do we balance these sort of two approaches. There's the deliberate science approach of, you know what question you're asking or you're answering, and you move very deliberately through that, particularly with space systems. And then you have the new space, which is get on orbit as fast as you can, and we'll figure it out later. Those are complementary in some things, but also challenge each other. And so I particularly, that's a blend of different types of approaches, Ian, and I thought maybe you could talk a little bit about your experience of dealing both with JPL and in the venture and business community about what challenges or opportunities are there.
Yeah, that's great, Brian. Colleague at Scripps, Marty Ralph, he studies atmospheric rivers. He's arguably the world's expert on it. He calls it research to operations, right? And he's transitioning this around these big atmospheric rivers coming off the Pacific, and that's a great program. And I spend some time with Marty every year, and it's really like, how do we infuse what we've been doing at a federal lab into what Muon's doing up in Mountain View? Move fast. We don't want to break anything on this one. We want to move fast on this one, though, because this is a big problem. And one thing that I've seen, is the timeline that Beth put up. For us to do an airborne instrument would take what I'm watching startups do: form a company, get on orbit. They're doing that quicker than what the federal labs are doing to build an airborne program. And the coverage is far greater. And so it's really an exciting time right now in the technology evolution stage, where we're seeing technology going to market faster than we've ever seen before out of the federal labs or even the defense primes. And it's just a really exciting time. And what I've seen with the fire go-to-market strategy is that because we have this non-dilutive equity coming in from philanthropic organizations, right? So the Betty and Gordon Moore Foundation, Google.org, the Minderoo Foundation, they're funding this constellation. That's something I've never seen before. I'm seeing it more and more, I guess is a way to say that. And so they're funding a startup, Muon, via Environmental Defense Fund, Earth Fire Alliance. This public-private partnership, and then there's, the lab's very invested in this with both Muon and then Aurora Tech, which is a German startup, which is doing a similar constellation. And there's a huge partnership there as well between the federal lab, between EFA, between Muon. We're all working together on this problem because it is a global crisis. It really is a global crisis that are impacting us in many ways. So it's just an exciting time to watch this technology evolution.
Thanks. Any other perspectives?
Yeah, I'd like to add, I think it's just important to do both, really, at the same time, hand in hand. I mean, these fast development cycles are absolutely crucial and critical to move forward for us as a society. On the other hand, they're only possible because there were government investment in the first place to develop the technologies which are now being used in an operational sense. So this transition of government-funded first offs, kind of one of its kind, really challenging first developments. Not all of them work, but then the ones which are successful and can be implemented commercially should. And I think really this hand in hand is an opportunity and a challenge at the same time.
Yeah, I agree. I think working hand to hand is key because this is a global challenge, and we all have to work together so that we can be better off in the face of increasing fire on the landscape. And I mean, that's even part of Earth Fire Alliance's name, Alliance. And so, with FireSat, I'll say I'm personally really excited for trying to validate our instrument and working with others across NASA to help get ground truth. One thing we have planned this fall is to work with NASA and the FireScience program in their fall campaign. You saw some of the amazing images that came out of their spring campaigns with Avris, for example, and they also fly the master instrument. By having that really beautifully calibrated airborne instruments and being able to take concurrent observations from FireSat at the same time over those prescribed burns in the FireSense fall campaign is going to be critical for helping to ground the calibration. And it's a perfect example of us all working together.
Thanks. We've got a couple of questions on some specific questions about the technology of FireSat, but they sort of fit in the similar theme about partnerships. Like, how do we, is the problem bigger than one solution? right? It's what is the system that goes to it. So I'll start with a question on FireSat, and then turn maybe to you, Felix, to talk a little bit about perspectives of a global engagement to address the technology problems that we're facing, and how do we do the hard thing of really collaborating versus talking about it. So the first question is the data collected from FireSat. So FireSat is, what is different about the data collected from FireSat than, from example, some of the weather satellites and NASA and NOAA systems that are up today, as well as some of the other planned systems like the Canada's Wildland FireSat or Wildfire Sat and Aurora Tech or other private companies. So can you talk a little bit about what's different and how you got there?
Yeah, sure. So when you look at these weather satellites, and so GOES, and then the VIIRS and MODIS instruments, these are amazing, complex systems that serve so many different scientific needs. They don't just focus on fire, and so they provide information about vegetative health and ocean currents and so many other things. And so one huge difference is that with FireSat, we decided to focus on fire alone. And so that simplified the requirement set. It simplified the system that we needed to build. And so because we were focusing on fire, we were driving to different requirement sets, different requirements. And so we have a different spatial resolution. And then with the full constellation, we have a cadence with about 50 satellites that would be a 20-minute revisit globally. And so that's some of the differences across the different systems.
That's great. And so Felix, as you know, the fact that there are different systems in different stages of transition. Some are government, some are private funded, some are nonprofit now. I mean, it's a very different world of partnerships today, but a very large problem. And I know with your experience of working with the World Economic Forum and some of these larger forums, could you talk a little bit about what it takes what are the challenges you see and opportunities for all these different groups getting together to try and address one problem?
Yeah, thank you. It's such an important topic. It's close to my heart. We all know if we want to really solve a really important or complex problem, we need to have a strong team. So, I think this is key to build a team. This is how I'm thinking about we can solve this. So it's working hand in hand. It's not just one partner or one element can do it all. It's not just, as I said before, it's not just monitoring and detecting the fires. It is really a holistic challenge we need to address, and we need to bring together the different players, the different expertise, but they don't necessarily do that just by themselves because there's not necessarily an inherent driver to start working together. It requires like an activation energy, right? You have to invest something in order to get out there and start working collaboratively. And therefore, I think what I see, what's really encouraging that organizations that we work within, like Google.org, for example, are stepping forward, and other philanthropies as well. As you know, they're providing the environment, providing the resources needed, the incentives for people to start collaborating. They say, well, you, Brian, you do this, Ian, you do that. How about you work together? I give you money to do both work on this one, and then together we can actually do much more than individually.
Can I add something to that, Brian? So I think something that Felix hit on earlier, all the great work that Muon or Aurora Tech or these startups are doing would not have been enabled without the 50-year investment that has come out of the US government and other ESA, European Space Agency. And as we look at this multispectral RGB imagery, for us old folks, I remember, Landsat launched in 50 years ago, plus 50 years ago, and that really enabled us to understand the Earth from 2-week repeat coverage. And then we got into the 2000s and MODIS launched, and we're looking at daily multispectral. And all these understanding of should we have a mid-wave band or a long-wave band or RGB or what our band selection is all based on the fundamental work that's happened at NASA, the European Space Agency, JAXA, ISRO, across the board. A lot of investment, working with the Brazilians and understanding what was going on in the Amazon, and all that critical work that NASA's been part of, NOAA's been part of, our international partners, and to get to a purpose-driven satellite like FireSat required that 50 years of investment. And we wouldn't have the right choice of bands, the right spatial coverage, the right temporal coverage. And those fundamentals of remote sensing are so important. And that was billions and billions and billions in a lot of people's careers that have gotten us to that. So I think the capital investment has been critical there.
Yeah, and I just wanted to build on what Ian's saying, because you're exactly right. It's no surprise when you look at these bands that they're very similar to the bands on MODIS and VIIRS, because all of that expertise was known, and years, decades of experience and work in identifying fires, and this is what works, and this is what works for identifying false alerts, which is a huge problem in identifying thermal anomalies on the ground. How do we know if it's a fire or a sun glint or a fire or a methane flare? And being able to leverage all that amazing heritage and deep scientific knowledge it also helped us to enable the instrument design and the system design. Good point.
Yeah.
Thanks. And that's a great discussion as we flow through. One of the things that popped up as we went is this is going to be a lot of data just from this. And we mentioned several other systems that are going to collect data. And we have the existing data set coming from years of MODIS operations and VIIRS, but now we have this data set coming. We have other data, even a lot of airborne data coming together. As a group, we talked about satellites. We talked a little bit about communications, but what are some of the barriers or opportunities you see in order to apply the data that we're collecting, or to change the way firefighters make decisions on the ground? Like what's helping us get there, and what does the community still need to focus on in order to get there?
Yeah, I see a big opportunity today with all this data that's coming to the ground and the evolution of machine learning and AI. So machine learning, it just is really data hungry, and being able to feed even more data across these multispectral bands, different biomes, different times of year, that is really going to help inform fire progression models by having the data over with a high time cadence over many different scenarios, grass fires, deciduous fires, and understanding how fire progresses differently in different conditions, thinking about pre-fire conditions and soil moisture and what vegetation is on the ground, and all of that can really be folded into machine learning algorithms, and that's going to advance our understanding for fire progression, which I think would be the gold standard.
You just mentioned fire progression. We actually have a question about fire forecasting, and that is, what is the state of art today on fire forecasting, both in terms of tactical, like I assume that's like where is the fire going now, but also in long term. So maybe, Cathy, if you could start with that, and then maybe Ian jump in on that from the atmospheric side.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so in visiting things like the geographic area coordination centers, where these are large centers, and looking at the first responders and the products that they put out, they have models where, in 3-hour increments or 5-hour increments, they have where they project these fire lines will be. And these are really complicated models because they're the fusion of so many different types of data. You have humidity and wind speeds, and so it's a really interesting problem because you have to bring all this data to bear on a very specific topography too, because the slopes matter and access roads matter for their responses. And so the progression models that I was seeing, were getting uncertain as you were going further and further out as you might expect, and they really weren't going that far out before you would end up with uncertainty. And so I think the key will be to help inform and ground this in a physics-based model in addition to what we can learn through machine learning to be able to improve these models?
Yeah, so you have two different components of models, and Cathy and I were talking about this earlier, and she teed that up perfectly, which is AI and ML is handling the satellite data, but as we try to model complex things on Earth, like fire spread or weather, that a lot of the physics-based models are really still valid and really important to keep investing in. And so you have weather models, and that we need to improve the higher resolution of those to really understand, because a lot of wildfires are in mountain terrain, and your large-scale weather models don't even capture the topography. Then there's fire spread models. So fire spread models are how is the fire interacting? And I do think remote sensing and stuff that both Felix and I agree completely on is that the tools that are coming out of the microwave or hyperspectral will allow us to understand the pre-fire conditions. Now that we have FireSat coming online, the active fire is getting handled on orbit. And now we can start to focus on this remote sensing tools for pre-fire conditions. There's another company, TechnoSilva. They're in merger and acquisition mode right now, and they're buying the companies that are doing the wildfire modeling. And I think and they're out there and engaged with CAL FIRE and all the firefighting agencies and the utility companies, and they're really moving the needle forward on what it is to understand fire spread and then pre-fire conditions. And that's really what we need to get to. And so, Felix, yeah, go ahead.
Just one small addition. I think this is the wildfire models is really where academia plays an extremely important role.
Yeah. And I agree with that. And that's where a lot of this has come out of.
Does the blend, we're going to shift a little bit into the relationship of public safety, commercial industry, now nonprofits going together. But a leading question for that is, if the role of academia to do long-term research and use data essentially to create new knowledge for us that crosses many industries, with the presence, particularly in remote sensing, of commercial companies, large data sets that are often proprietary, and other times that they're not, or they have licensing restrictions. Can you talk a little bit about how, just experiences in your collaboration, how do we move beyond those barriers to make sure the data that we're collecting as a group feeds that academic research?
Yeah, thanks. Again, I think it's a team approach, and it's even within academia, which I think there's a reason for academia to do basic research for things that are not necessarily purpose-driven initially. You don't know where it's leading. If you don't have that, you don't build the basis for discovery and for things you can benefit later. But some research should also become much more purpose-driven, should be applied, should be knowing. Researchers need to go out and talk to the stakeholders, the end users, and really understand what it is that specifically is needed, and work towards finding solutions that help there. And then technology transfer is absolutely important, that the things that are being learned by academia is being open, publicly available, published, and then can be uptaken by either commercial or other entities as well.
I think it's a perfect plug for Earth Fire Alliance. It's that you're addressing that, Brian, where in the wildfire space. So we talk about Earth observing markets, and there's a lot going on right now. But what I find is interesting is that the wildfire problem, because of this private-public partnership, this philanthropic organization, is our first really clear go-to-market strategy on a minimum viable product that's doing customer discovery, right? Those are all the buzzwords that we hear in the startup space, and it's really true, where we call it stakeholder engagement on our side of the fence, but it's really, what does the customer need? Do they need thermal bands? Do they need fire bands? Do they need fire spread models? We're asking those hard questions, and we're getting this non-dilutive equity from the philanthropic organizations, and ventures jumping in as well, because there's some really clear venture groups that want to fund this, and we're getting, with the Earth observing market, we saw greenhouse gas as kind of this single product, and that's coming along at the same time. We saw the high resolution imagery out of Maxar Planet, all these other companies, but that wasn't really a product on a specific climatological problem. And this is the first time that we're really seeing, well, greenhouse gas too, I don't want to give up on that one, but this one's going faster than I think the greenhouse gas question has. And so it's really fascinating to watch. And I think what Earth Fire Alliance is addressing is really like, how does this come together in a single data product, or multiple data products, or whatever that answer is.
Yeah, I think part of the way we got there to go quickly was really focusing on that one core product, like you said. You know, what is that MVP? And keeping a laser focus on fire first, and how do we get something on orbit as fast as possible? We had many conversations about building an instrument and flying it on an airborne platform, which is a great idea, and it's wonderful, and for so many applications, that's the right answer. But for us, where we were trying to make sure we got something quickly on orbit so that we could learn how that worked with the first responder community and then iterate and keep improving, we just sprinted forward in that specific way. And Beth is well aware of this, is working on our next 3 satellites that we plan to launch in 2026.
And I think one thing that really adds to the speed that a startup or a private company can do with customer discovery, having done user-centered design as a civil servant at NASA and now with Muon, is there's just so much less barrier and access to be able to freely talk to all these different stakeholders and be in continual contact as we do these iterative cycles and make sure we're designing something that is impactful.
That's great. And thank you all for engaging in the discussion. Thank you for attending and chatting. We're going to be around so you can ask us some additional questions. We didn't get to all the questions, but we covered a lot of terrain here between both space systems, policies, collaboration moving forward. How do we operate in an environment which is dramatically changing in terms of both federal support, international support, the ability of new space to jump into that, for industry to jump in. So it's just really an exciting time because of the potential. It's not an exciting time seeing the effects of the negative effects of wildfire, but we're also faced with that challenge. There are so many potential solutions that we have that now we have some hard work of just coordinating across each other to get there. So thank you all for sitting together and discussing, because I've now had 2 hours of working with you, which is wonderful. I've got like notes, and hopefully this was good for you to exchange information, but also hopefully really valuable to the conference. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.